I'm Mark, 45, and I own a pretty successful wine bar. I've been married to Eleanor, used to be Emily, new name for dramatic change, 42 for 5 years. And that means I've also been in the life of Coralie, formerly Kylie, Eleanor's 18-year-old daughter, for 5 years. This morning it all blew up. It started, as these things often do, with something utterly mundane. A goddamn pile of avocado toast crumbs. I was halfway through my morning coffee, the good stuff from that local roaster, when I walked into the kitchen and saw the battlefield Coralie had left in her wake. Dirty dishes overflowing the sink, sticky rings from her iced latte on the counter, and of course, the Everest of avocado toast crumbs. I took a breath, trying to channel my inner Zen master. "Coralie, could you maybe clean up after yourself?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, like I was asking about the weather, not addressing the biohazard zone that was my kitchen. That's when she dropped the bomb. "You're not my father, so don't tell me what to do." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy, like the humidity right before a summer storm. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the tone. That bored, dismissive, I'm too cool for this tone that only an 18-year-old with a platinum credit card and zero real-world experience can truly weaponize. Coralie was sprawled at the kitchen island, oversized hoodie, designer leggings that probably cost more than my first car, glued to her phone. The only acknowledgement she gave me was a dramatic eye roll before she slurped down another mouthful of whatever sugary concoction Starbucks had conned her into buying. I swear I felt my blood pressure spike. "Excuse me," I managed to choke out, setting my mug down a little harder than necessary. Silence. Just more scrolling, more slurping, more eye-rolling. It took a second for the sheer audacity of it to sink in. 5 years. 5 years of Little League games, school plays, and emergency trips to the mall because she absolutely had to have that specific pair of shoes. 5 years of orthodontist bills, driving lessons, and putting up with her teenage angst and drama. 5 years of stepping up when her deadbeat bio dad couldn't even be bothered to remember her birthday. 5 goddamn years, and I was nobody. I exhaled slowly, trying to regain my composure. "All right, let's back up a second. What's your problem, Coralie?" She finally put her phone down, though she still managed to give it a lingering glance like it was a lifeline. "I need you to pay for NYU. Just like that. No preamble, no softening the blow, just a flat statement of entitlement, like she was asking me to refill the sugar bowl. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "NYU? You mean the school that costs, what, 70 grand a year?" "It's like 55, she corrected, as if that made it any less insane. "And yeah, duh. I already got in. Eleanor said you'd cover it." Eleanor. Of course, Eleanor. I turned to her, perched at the kitchen table, conveniently pretending to be absorbed by her crossword puzzle. "You want to chime in here?" She sighed, rubbing her temples like she was already dealing with a migraine. "Mark, she's been dreaming about this since she was a little girl." A little girl who decided this last week after she saw some influencer's NYU dorm tour, I countered, my voice rising. "She's got no plan, no scholarships, no job lined up, just me and my checkbook." Coralie scoffed, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "I don't need a job." "You have money. That's why you've always helped out, right?" I swear to God I felt my brain short-circuit. "Come again?" She waved her hand again, like it was all perfectly obvious. "You own a wine bar. It's like, fancy. You're loaded. That's why you're still around, right? Otherwise, why would you keep paying for me?" Eleanor shifted in her seat, her face a mask of discomfort. "Coralie, that's enough." No, I want to hear this," I said, crossing my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, that's what you think? That I stuck around out of some financial obligation, not because, oh, I don't know, because I actually cared about you?" She blinked, genuinely confused. "You're not my dad." And there it was, the truth bomb. I sat back, letting out a slow, deliberate breath. "Right. I'm not. I'm just a guy who paid for your braces, your dance classes, your weekend trips to LA, your new iPhone every year. I'm nobody." Coralie shrugged, completely unbothered. "Exactly." I turned to Eleanor, expecting, I don't know what, some sign of support? A lecture on proper etiquette? But she just looked tired, like this whole thing was inevitable. "You don't have to pay for it," she said softly, her eyes avoiding mine. I just thought, you thought that I'd keep bankrolling someone who doesn't even respect me? I finished, my voice tight with barely suppressed anger. Coralie groaned, slamming her phone down on the counter. This is so unfair. Do you know how embarrassing it is to be the only one of my friends not going to a good school? Dad said you'd pull this. I let out a humorless laugh. Your dad? The same guy who hasn't sent you a dime since, what, 2017? The one who lives in a one-bedroom apartment and hasn't chipped in for a single thing in years? He has opinions about my finances now? She folded her arms, her nose in the air. At least he's not controlling. Controlling? I rubbed my temples, fighting the urge to scream. Wanting a little appreciation for 5 years of financial support is controlling now? Eleanor finally spoke up, her voice strained. Mark, I think we should all just take a break. No, let's not, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. I'll make this easy for you, Coralie. Since I'm nobody, then guess what? Nobody is paying for NYU. Nobody is covering your rent. Nobody is buying you another pair of designer sneakers. You want an education. Get a job. You want me to act like a dad? Maybe try acting like a daughter. Coralie's face went pale. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious, I said, my voice cold and hard. Silence. Heavy, awkward silence. Even Eleanor looked uncomfortable. Then Coralie scoffed, grabbed her phone, and stormed off, slamming her bedroom door so hard I swore I felt the foundation shake. I turned to Eleanor, waiting for her to say something. Anything. She just sighed. She's young, Mark. She doesn't understand. No, I said, grabbing my keys. She understands perfectly. And just like that, I realized something. I'd spent 5 years trying to be someone's father when she never wanted one in the first place. And somehow, that stung more than I wanted to admit. I walked out. Looking back, maybe I was naive. Maybe I should have seen this coming from a mile away. But when you're in the thick of it, when you're trying to build a life with someone, it's easy to ignore the red flags. I met Eleanor at my wine bar, the Gilded Grape. She was a numbers person, meticulous with details, working as a part-time accountant after her divorce. Trying to keep things stable for Coralie, she'd said. There was this quiet charm about her, polite and reserved, not the type to cause a scene. After a few months of her handling my books, one thing led to another, and we started dating. At first, things were smooth. Eleanor wasn't dramatic like some of my past relationships, and there was something comforting about her steady presence. She was the opposite of everything I was used to. She brought a kind of calm into my chaotic world. Then I met Coralie. She was 9, all big blue eyes and bouncing curls, clutching an iPad and wearing a tiny Coach purse. Adorable. Eleanor had painted a picture of her as sweet and well-mannered, and in those early days, I believed it. Coralie was polite, even friendly, always asking for a sip of my soda or plopping onto the couch next to me with a pile of questions about my bar. But kids grow up, and so did Coralie's expectations. By the time Eleanor and I got married, I started noticing a shift. Brand names became a necessity, and every conversation seemed to revolve around what she wanted next. Nothing extreme at first, just subtle things. The right brand names, the latest gadgets, always needing the best of everything. If she didn't have it, she made sure to mention which one of her friends did, like a walking, talking commercial for overpriced sneakers and handbags. I chalked it up to teenage entitlement, figured she'd grow out of it. Spoiler alert, she didn't. One Christmas, I surprised her with a MacBook, top of the line, brand new. Her face barely moved. Oh, it's not the rose gold one. The next summer, Eleanor and I spent a fortune sending her to a leadership camp. She spent the entire trip complaining about the awful cabins and the lack of Wi-Fi. Meanwhile, Todd, her biological dad, was the greatest guy in the world. Never mind that he never paid child support, never showed up for parent-teacher meetings, never did a single thing that required actual effort. He was fun. He'd pop in with some grand promise, a weekend road trip, a shopping spree, and then disappear for another 6 months. But when he bailed, did Coralie blame him? No. She just waited for the next empty promise. I remember one night at dinner, she casually mentioned, "Dad said he's getting me a Tesla for my birthday." Eleanor and I shared a look. A Tesla for a 17-year-old from the man who once borrowed money from her piggy bank and never paid it back. Still, Coralie talked about it like it was a done deal. She picked out the color, the interior, even planned her first road trip. Meanwhile, I was the guy who actually got her places, driving her to dance classes, covering her ridiculous Uber bills, fixing the dent she put in Eleanor's car when she barely tapped the mailbox. But none of that mattered because Todd was getting her a Tesla. A week before her birthday, she brought it up again. I think I'll drive it to LA for my first weekend road trip with the girls. I didn't even argue. I just nodded and sipped my coffee, waiting. Then, on the big day, Todd showed up empty-handed, grinning like he hadn't just delivered the biggest letdown in history. Things are tight right now, sweetheart. You understand. But don't worry, I'll make it up to you. And just like that, the Tesla was gone. I braced myself for a meltdown, but Coralie just shrugged and turned to me. Can I take Eleanor's car? That's when it hit me. She never expected Todd to follow through. She just liked the fantasy. And when reality crashed down, I was the fallback plan. Again, I should have walked away then. Should have seen the writing on the wall, but I didn't. I kept thinking, kept hoping, that one day she'd see the difference between a promise and an action. Turns out, I was wrong. When Coralie turned 18, I thought I'd do something memorable. Not the usual cake and party hats deal, but something fitting for a new adult status. A night out, VIP lounge at a high-end spot, dress code fancy, hors d'oeuvres, the whole experience. She was thrilled. OMG, my college friends are going to freak out. That was the first and last time she even pretended to be grateful. The night started out smooth. Coralie, decked out in some designer dress she guilted Eleanor into buying, was taking selfies like she was about to grace the cover of Vogue. Her friends arrived, equally overdressed, all squealing and posing like reality show extras. I sat at the bar sipping bourbon, watching the whole circus unfold. Then Todd showed up. Of course he did. Because why wouldn't he? I saw him the second he stumbled through the entrance. Cheap suit, gold chain, oversized sunglasses indoors. He had that sloppy confidence of a guy who thought he looked like $1 million, but clearly didn't. And on his wrist, a Rolex so fake it probably ticked out loud. Ugh, here we go, I muttered under my breath. He spotted Coralie and bellowed her name across the lounge. Heads turned. Coralie froze mid-selfie, her friends whispering excitedly. If she was embarrassed, she hid it well. Hey, princess. Happy birthday. He swaggered over, arms wide like some mafia boss greeting his heir. She forced a smile. Hey, Dad. I took another sip of my bourbon. Just 1 hour. I just needed to survive this for 1 hour. Then he spotted me. What are you doing here, Mark? This is my daughter's night. I should have ignored him, but Todd had a way of dragging people into his nonsense. I set my glass down. Hosting the party. Since you know, I paid for it. Todd waved me off like I was a waiter who forgot his drink order. Relax, man. It's a celebration. Then he grabbed the mic. I knew it was over the second he tapped it. The whole lounge went quiet. Even the bartender stopped mid-pour. All right, everybody. A toast to my beautiful daughter. He threw an arm around Coralie, nearly knocking over her drink. I just want to say, Coralie, don't listen to this guy. Daddy's got you covered, and you know what? I'm buying you that Tesla, baby. A murmur rippled through the room. Coralie's friends gasped. She beamed. And me? I just watched the disaster unfold. Then, Todd, because subtlety has never been his strong suit, grabbed someone's champagne flute and hurled it against the wall. The crowd collectively inhaled. I could practically hear the mental calculations of the manager, deciding whether it was worth throwing him out immediately. The crash echoed. Gasps. A bouncer took a step forward, and Coralie, she just stood there like none of this had anything to do with her. I exhaled. That was it. That was my last straw. I picked up my coat, left enough cash to cover the damage, and walked out. Todd could have his grand moment. Coralie could believe whatever fantasy she wanted. I was done. I stepped into the cold night air, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Relief. The fallout hit before I even had my first cup of coffee. Apparently, Todd's grand performance had gone viral. By the time I woke up, Coralie's birthday disaster was the hottest gossip in her school. Psycho Dad ruins party. Busted Rolex at VIP lounge. And my personal favorite, Tesla or tantrum? When I walked into the kitchen, Coralie was already pacing, phone clutched in her hand, scrolling furiously. Her face was red, her perfect morning smoothie untouched on the counter. She spun around the second she saw me. "This is your fault." I blinked, still trying to shake off my sleepiness. "Come again?" She held up her phone like it was proof of a crime scene. "You humiliated me. If you hadn't been there, Dad wouldn't have made a scene." Right. Because clearly I was the problem. Not Todd, who had made an absolute fool of himself. Not the cheap suit, not the fake Rolex, not the dramatic champagne throw. No, it was all me. Eleanor stood by the coffee maker, gripping her mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. She looked exhausted, like she had aged 5 years overnight. I waited for her to step in, to say something, anything. But she just pressed her lips together and stared at her coffee like it held the answers to the universe. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" Coralie's voice cracked, but whether it was from anger or humiliation, I couldn't tell. "Everyone's talking about it. People at school keep sending me clips." "I didn't force Todd to act like an idiot," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "That was all him." "But you didn't stop him." I let out a humorless laugh. "Stop him? Coralie, I've been trying to stop Todd from being Todd for years. You think I have some magic remote that controls him? He's a walking disaster. You just refuse to see it." Her jaw clenched. "He was just excited for my birthday." "Yeah? Was he also just excited when he promised you a Tesla he can't afford? Or when he showed up drunk and embarrassed you in front of all your friends? Or when he threw a drink in the middle of a crowded bar?" Silence. Her eyes darted to Eleanor as if waiting for backup, but Eleanor still said nothing. I sighed, rubbing my temple. "Look, I get it. You're upset. But maybe instead of blaming me, you should ask yourself why your favorite parent is the one who caused all of this." Her face twisted in anger, but before she could spit out another excuse, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence left behind was deafening. I turned to Eleanor, waiting for something. A defense, an apology, hell, even just a sigh. But she just stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes on the floor. "That's it?" I asked. "Nothing to say?" She exhaled, finally looking at me. "She's just young, Mark. She doesn't understand." "No, Eleanor," I said, my voice tight. "She understands perfectly. She just doesn't care." I grabbed my keys and walked out. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't sure if I wanted to come back. The cold morning air hit me as I stepped outside, sharper than I expected. A couple of days passed, just enough time for Coralie's birthday disaster to fade from school gossip, or at least for her to pretend it didn't happen. Then the envelope arrived. Bright white, crisp, with the iconic NYU logo stamped right in the center. It sat on the counter like some royal decree. Coralie must have been waiting for it because the second I stepped into the kitchen, she was already holding it, practically vibrating with excitement. I barely had time to pour my coffee before she spun toward me, practically bouncing on her heels like she had just won the lottery. "I got in! NYU accepted me!" Her voice dripped with the kind of giddy excitement I hadn't seen since she got her first iPhone. "I need $80,000 a year." I almost choked on my coffee. It took me a second to process what she had just said. Not a question, not a conversation, just a demand straight to the point, like ordering a drink at Starbucks. I set my mug down and let out a low chuckle. "And your real dad's gonna cover that, right?" Her smile vanished. "Excuse me?" "You know Todd, the guy with the fake Rolex and the champagne throwing skills. He's the one you always call Dad, right? So he should be the one paying for your dream school." She scoffed. "That's not funny. He doesn't have that kind of money." I crossed my arms. "Neither do I." Her whole face twisted like I had just said the most offensive thing in the world. "You're joking. You own a business. You have savings. You're literally rich." I laughed again, but this time it wasn't amused. "Coralie, do you even know how much $80,000 a year is? That's over $300,000 by the time you graduate, for a degree you don't even have a plan for." She threw her hands in the air. "You're ruining my life. NYU is my dream." I leaned back against the counter, watching her unravel. "I thought your dream was a Tesla. Or was it that Chanel bag last Christmas? Or maybe that week in Cabo with your friends? Funny how your dreams always seem to involve my bank account. Coralie let out a frustrated scream, her fists clenching. You don't get it. Everyone's going to college. If I don't go to NYU, I'll look like a loser. I shrugged. Then get a job, take out loans, apply for scholarships. That's what most people do. Eleanor, who had been silent through all of this, finally spoke. Mark, be reasonable. She's just a kid. She needs support. I turned to her, my patience hanging by a thread. A kid? She's 18. Old enough to make demands, but not old enough to take responsibility? Eleanor exhaled, rubbing her temples. You have the money. You could help her. I shook my head. That's not the point. She doesn't appreciate anything. She expects me to just hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars like it's nothing. Eleanor's voice dropped, controlled but firm. She's your daughter, Mark, like it or not. I felt my jaw clench. No, she's not, remember? That's what she said to me last week. I'm not her dad, until she needs tuition money. The room went silent. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. Then, Eleanor straightened, her expression unreadable. If you don't pay for this, we're done. I blinked. Excuse me? She crossed her arms. I mean it, Mark. Either you step up as a father, or this marriage is over. I stared at her, the weight of her words settling in. I had always known Eleanor avoided confrontation, but this was something else. Coralie stood there, arms folded, chin tilted up like a contestant on a game show waiting for the grand prize reveal, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I was going to say. I looked Eleanor straight in the eye and let the words roll out, calm and deliberate. Okay, we're getting divorced. Her face barely changed at first, as if she hadn't fully processed what I said. Then, the realization hit. Her lips parted slightly, her breath caught, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Panic. She thought I would beg. She thought I would crumble like a bad poker player with a weak hand. Instead, I grabbed my coffee, took a slow sip, and waited. Coralie's reaction, though, was immediate. She screeched like I had just declared the end of civilization itself. You're ruining everything. My life. My future. My NYU. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. I thought I was nobody to you, so why do you care? Her face turned a shade of red I'd only ever seen on toddlers mid-tantrum. You don't get to do this. You're just mad because you're a bitter old man. Eleanor finally found her voice. Mark, stop. You're being cruel. Cruel? I let out a short laugh. You just gave me an ultimatum. Pay for college or we're done. And now that I've made my choice, you don't like it? Coralie stomped her foot. You have money. It's not like it's a big deal. Ah yes, because dropping $300,000 is just like buying a latte. That did it. I set my coffee down and turned toward her, my voice sharper than before. You're right, I do have money, and guess what? None of it is yours. The air left the room. Even Eleanor seemed taken aback. Mark. I held up a hand. No, you both made it very clear what I am to you, a wallet. Well, that wallet is closing. You want to go to NYU, Coralie? Call your dad. Maybe he can sell that Rolex and put it down payment on your tuition. Her jaw dropped. You can't do that. I shrugged. Sure I can. I'm nobody, remember? And nobody isn't paying a dime. Eleanor stepped closer, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Her voice softened. Mark, let's talk about this. No, Eleanor, there's nothing to talk about. You made this decision when you turned our marriage into a transaction. I married a partner, not a customer. Silence, a thick, uncomfortable silence. Then Coralie let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. Whatever, Mom will take care of me. We don't need you. Eleanor stiffened, but she didn't deny it. I nodded. All right then, I'll have my lawyer reach out. You two take care. And just like that, I walked out. For the first time in years, I felt free. Walking away felt good. It felt better than I expected. But what came next? That was the part I hadn't really been looking forward to. See, I wasn't stupid. I had a prenup. When I married Eleanor, I had already built my business. And I wasn't about to let someone take half of it just because they decided marriage was a financial contract. So, when the papers were finalized, Eleanor got exactly what we both agreed to. Nothing extra. The lawyer fees she used must have burned her more. The day the settlement was finalized, I got a text from her. "Where am I supposed to go?" I stared at it for a long moment before setting my phone down and heading out for a steak dinner. Best steak I'd had in years. She'd always figured out she was an accountant, right? Numbers were her thing. Coralie, on the other hand, took the fallout harder. Turns out, NYU doesn't run on entitlement. Without my money, her acceptance letter was just a piece of fancy paper. She threw a tantrum when she realized FAFSA wasn't some magic credit card that paid for luxury dorm decor and weekend getaways. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that she'd gotten a job at Starbucks. The same Coralie who once snapped at a barista for messing up her oat-milk ratio was now the one taking orders. The same Coralie who once complained that walking to the fridge was too exhausting was now making lattes for minimum wage. Life's funny like that. As for Todd, he vanished. The man who had promised Coralie the world couldn't even be bothered to send her a gas card. The last I heard, he moved out of state, probably running from another set of debts. Eleanor and Coralie had no safety net, no trust fund, no wealthy benefactor to step in and fix things. And me. I was sitting on my patio, sipping a glass of wine from my own bar, wondering why I hadn't done this sooner. No more entitled demands, no more being treated like a walking ATM, just peace. And let me tell you, peace is worth every penny I didn't spend on them. Selling the house felt like finally canceling a gym membership I never used. Instant relief, no more wasted energy. I found a sleek, modern place with a view, something just for me. No more walking into a kitchen filled with someone else's mess. No more sinking money into a place that felt more like an obligation than a home. And of course, I bought the car I always wanted. The kind of car I was told was impractical or too flashy, because apparently it was fine for me to fund everyone else's dreams, just not my own. Now, every morning I took my coffee, slid into leather seats, and reminded myself that life was better when you stopped paying for other people's expectations. But that wasn't the end of the story. Of course it wasn't. Then, right on cue, the message arrived. It was Coralie. Predictably, a long, dramatic text about how she finally understood and how she had been going through a lot. She was sorry. She missed me. And, oh, by the way, she was struggling financially. Not long after, Eleanor followed up with her own version, less dramatic, more strategic. Something about how maybe we were too hasty and how we should at least talk. I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, something expensive, something they probably would have said was wasteful, and sat back on my patio. I blocked their numbers, took a slow sip, and let the silence settle in. Funny how the quiet never felt this good before. I stretched out in my chair, took another slow sip, and let the night breeze remind me that peace was the best investment I'd ever made. I often thought that what happened could have happened with many other people. Coralie's life choices were not the end of the world, but it did mean, for me, I had to end my marriage with Eleanor. I did not mind having a stepchild, but I did not love my new family situation turned me into an ATM. The quiet was nice, don't get me wrong. The absence of drama, the freedom from financial obligations. It was all a welcome change, but silence has a way of amplifying echoes, and the past few weeks had been filled with them. I kept replaying moments in my head. Small things, mostly. Coralie's face lighting up when I took her to that concert she'd been begging to see. Eleanor's smile when I surprised her with that weekend getaway to Napa. Times when I genuinely felt like we were a family. Were those moments real? Or were they just elaborate performances, carefully crafted to extract money and resources from me? The cynicism stung, but it was hard to shake. 5 years is a long time to invest in something, only to have it all come crashing down with a single entitled demand. My sleep wasn't great. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, replaying that final argument over and over again. Had I been too harsh, too quick to cut ties? Was I just running away from responsibility? Then I'd remind myself of Coralie's words, "You're not my dad," and Eleanor's ultimatum, and the sheer, breathtaking entitlement of it all. And I'd drift back to sleep, feeling a grudging sense of vindication. The wine bar was a refuge, Immersing myself in the business, surrounded by the familiar sounds of clinking glasses and lively conversation, helped to drown out the internal noise. I'd thrown myself into planning new events, experimenting with new wine pairings, and generally just being present with my staff and customers. One evening, a woman named Sarah, who'd been coming to the Gilded Grape for years, pulled up a stool at the bar. "You seem lighter, Mark," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Like you've shed a weight you didn't even know you were carrying." I chuckled, pouring her a glass of her usual Cabernet Sauvignon. "Maybe I have. It's been a period of adjustment, let's say." Sarah nodded knowingly. "Life throws curveballs, doesn't it? It's how you swing that matters." Her words resonated. I'd been so focused on the pain and betrayal that I'd forgotten to appreciate the opportunity I had in front of me. An opportunity to rebuild, to redefine, to create a life that was truly my own. But even as I embraced this new freedom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. A piece of me, a part of my identity, was still entangled in the wreckage of my marriage. And then, one day, a package arrived. It was small, unassuming, wrapped in plain brown paper, no return address. I eyed it suspiciously, wondering if it was some kind of elaborate prank or worse. I took a deep breath and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a photograph. A faded, slightly creased photograph. It was a picture of Coralie, maybe 10 years old, beaming at the camera, holding a drawing she'd made for me. A crayon drawing of a stick figure version of me, wearing a superhero cape with the words, "Best Dad Ever," scrawled across the top. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen this picture in years. Eleanor must have kept it tucked away somewhere. I stared at the photo for a long time, my mind flooded with memories. Memories of a time when Coralie genuinely seemed to care, when I felt like I was making a difference in her life. What had happened? When did things start to go wrong? Was there something I could have done differently? The questions swirled in my head, a chaotic vortex of guilt, regret, and confusion. I carefully placed the photo on my desk, a silent reminder of what once was. And then, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Who could be calling me from an unlisted number? Reluctantly, I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. A shaky voice on the other end replied, "Mark, it's Eleanor. I need your help." Why did Eleanor call for help? Should I help her? Eleanor's voice was raw, stripped of its usual composure. I could hear the faint sound of sniffling in the background. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice tight with apprehension. "It's Coralie," she began, her voice cracking. She's in trouble." My stomach clenched. Trouble. That vague, all-encompassing word that could mean anything from a minor scrape to a full-blown catastrophe. "What kind of trouble?" I pressed, my mind racing. Had she gotten into an accident? Was she involved in something illegal? Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then took a shaky breath. She borrowed some money from the wrong people." My blood ran cold. How much money? $20,000, she whispered, the words barely audible. $20,000. That was a significant sum, especially for an 18-year-old working a minimum wage job. "What did she need it for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She wanted to go to that music festival in Coachella," Eleanor explained, her voice laced with shame. "All her friends were going, and she didn't want to be left out." Coachella, of course, the epitome of superficiality and conspicuous consumption. The kind of event where people spent thousands of dollars to pretend to be bohemian for a weekend. "And she couldn't just say no?" I asked, my voice tinged with sarcasm. "You know how she is, Mark," Eleanor said, her voice pleading. "She's always been so desperate to fit in, to keep up with her friends." "So, she borrowed $20,000 from loan sharks to go to a music festival?" I said, my voice incredulous. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Eleanor sobbed. "She thought she could pay it back with her tips from Starbucks, but she fell behind, and now they're threatening her." My mind was reeling. This was a disaster. A complete and utter disaster. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice hardening. They want the money back with interest, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. They're giving her a week. If she doesn't pay, they're going to hurt her. A week. That wasn't much time. And you can't pay it? I asked, already knowing the answer. I don't have that kind of money, Mark, Eleanor said, her voice desperate. I'm barely scraping by as it is. That's why I called you. I know you don't owe us anything, but I don't know what else to do. Please, Mark, please help her. Silence hung heavy in the air. I thought of the photograph on my desk, the innocent, smiling face of a little girl who once thought I was the best dad ever. I thought of Coralie, working at Starbucks, struggling to make ends meet, facing threats of violence from ruthless criminals. I thought of Eleanor, desperate and terrified, reaching out to me as a last resort. And I thought of myself, finally free from the burden of their expectations, finally living a life of peace and contentment. What should I do? Should I risk everything to help them? Or should I protect myself and walk away? The decision weighed on me like a ton of bricks. I don't know, Eleanor, I said, my voice strained. I need some time to think about it. Please, Mark, she begged. Don't wait too long. Her life could depend on it. She hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The echoes of the past had become a deafening chorus, threatening to drown out the peace I had so carefully cultivated. Sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, the image of that photograph burning in my mind. Coralie, young and innocent, looking up at me with adoration. How could I turn my back on her now, knowing she was in danger? But then, another voice would chime in. A voice of reason, reminding me of the betrayal, the entitlement, the sheer audacity of their demands. Why should I jeopardize my own well-being to rescue someone who had treated me with such disrespect? Was I obligated to help simply because I had once played a fatherly role in her life? The questions circled endlessly, each one tugging me in a different direction. I got out of bed and poured myself a glass of bourbon. The amber liquid swirled in the glass, reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. I took a long sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. It didn't help. I walked out onto my patio, the cool night air offering a brief respite from the turmoil in my head. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a vast expanse of interconnected lives, each one with its own unique set of struggles and challenges. I felt a profound sense of isolation. I was alone, carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, with no clear path forward. I thought about Eleanor. I had once loved her. I had believed she was different from the other women in my life. More grounded, more genuine, more appreciative. But in the end, she had proven to be just as selfish and manipulative as the rest. Had I been a fool to trust her? To open my heart to her and Coralie? The bitterness rose in my throat, choking me with resentment. But then, I thought about Coralie again. A young woman, barely out of childhood, trapped in a dangerous situation with no one to turn to. Regardless of her past mistakes, did she deserve to suffer the consequences of her recklessness? Was I willing to live with the guilt of knowing that I could have helped her, but chose not to? The answer, I realized, was no. I couldn't abandon her. I couldn't let her fall victim to those criminals. But how could I help without enabling her entitlement and rewarding her bad behavior? The solution, I realized, was not to simply write a check and walk away. I needed to be more involved. I needed to teach her a lesson. I finished my bourbon, a sense of resolve settling over me. I knew what I had to do. I went back inside, picked up my phone, and dialed Eleanor's number. "Eleanor, it's Mark," I said when she answered. "I'll help Coralie, but it's going to be on my terms." "What are my terms? How am I going to make sure I teach Coralie a lesson?" "What do you mean, on your terms?" Eleanor asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "I mean that I'm not just going to hand over $20,000 and hope for the best," I said, my voice firm. "I have conditions." "Conditions?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Mark, my daughter's life is in danger. This isn't the time for bargaining." "I understand the urgency, Eleanor," I said, trying to remain calm. "But I'm not going to enable Coralie's bad behavior. I need to know that she's going to learn from this experience." "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice resigned. "First, I want Coralie to tell me everything," I said. I want to know exactly how she got into this mess, who she borrowed the money from, and what kind of threats she's been receiving." "She's scared, Mark," Eleanor said, her voice pleading. "She doesn't want to talk about it." "Then I can't help her," I said, my voice unwavering. "I need to know the truth, or I'm walking away." There was a long silence. I could hear Eleanor breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll talk to her. I'll try to get her to open up." "Good," I said. "Second, I want to meet with these people. I want to look them in the eye and make sure they understand that Coralie is under my protection." "That's insane, Mark," Eleanor exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. "You can't do that. You'll put yourself in danger." "I'm not afraid," I said, my voice steely. "I'm not going to let them intimidate her. I need to show them that I'm not someone they can mess with." "You don't understand who these people are, Mark," she cried. "They're ruthless. They'll do anything for money." "Then they'll understand that I'm willing to do anything to protect Coralie," I said, my voice unwavering. Another long silence. I could feel Eleanor's fear radiating through the phone line. "Okay," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I'll try to arrange a meeting, but I can't promise anything." "Third," I said, my voice firm, "Coralie needs to get a second job. She needs to start taking responsibility for her finances. She needs to understand the value of hard work." "She's already working at Starbucks," Eleanor protested. "She doesn't have time for another job." "Then she needs to find a way to make time," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm not going to bail her out of this mess if she's not willing to put in the effort to fix it herself." "What kind of job do you want her to get?" Eleanor asked, her voice defeated. "I don't care," I said. "Something that challenges her, something that forces her to step outside her comfort zone, something that teaches her the meaning of discipline and perseverance." "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I'll talk to her about it." "And fourth, I want Coralie to start seeing a therapist," I said. "She needs to address the underlying issues that led her to make such reckless decisions. She needs to learn how to cope with her insecurities and her need for validation." "A therapist?" Eleanor repeated, her voice incredulous. "Mark, that's expensive. I can't afford that." "I'll pay for it," I said, my voice firm, "but only if Coralie is willing to commit to the process. She needs to understand that this isn't just about paying off a debt, it's about changing her life." "Okay," Eleanor said finally, her voice resigned. "I'll talk to her about it, but I don't know if she'll agree." "Then I can't help her," I said, my voice unwavering. "These are my conditions, Eleanor. Take them or leave them." I hung up, leaving her alone with my demands. I knew I was being tough. I knew I was pushing her and Coralie to their limits. But I also knew that it was the only way to break the cycle of entitlement and dependence that had plagued their lives for so long. I was willing to help, but only if they were willing to help themselves. Had I been too hard on them? The next few days were a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I waited, phone in hand, for Eleanor to call. I wanted to know if Coralie was willing to meet my conditions. The silence was deafening, broken only by the constant hum of the city outside my window. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Mark," she said, her voice weary. "Coralie agreed to meet with you. She's scared, but she understands that this is her only option." A wave of relief washed over me. "Good," I said. "When and where?" "Tomorrow afternoon at that coffee shop near her work," Eleanor said. "She wants you to meet her alone." "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early. I sat at a table near the window, watching the street. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. My heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't seen Coralie since our explosive argument. I didn't know what to expect. Finally, she arrived. She looked pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. She was wearing her Starbucks uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked younger than her 18 years, more vulnerable. She approached my table hesitantly. "Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Coralie," I replied, standing up to greet her. "Have a seat." We sat in silence for a moment, the tension hanging heavy in the air. "Eleanor told me about your conditions," Coralie said, breaking the silence. I understand." I nodded. "I'm not doing this to punish you, Coralie. I said, my voice gentle. I'm doing this because I care about you. I want to help you get out of this mess, but I also want to help you learn from it. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I've been so stupid. We all make mistakes, Coralie, I said. The important thing is to learn from them and move on. She took a deep breath and began to tell me her story. She explained how she had borrowed the money from a group of shady individuals she had met through a friend of a friend. She had been desperate to go to Coachella, to fit in with her friends, to feel like she was part of something special. She had convinced herself that she could pay the money back with her tips from Starbucks. But she had quickly fallen behind, and the interest had started to pile up. They started calling me, threatening me, she said, her voice trembling. They said they knew where I lived, where I worked. They said they were going to hurt me if I didn't pay them back. I listened patiently, my heart aching for her. I could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. I'm so sorry, Mark, she said, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I just wanted to be like everyone else. I know, Coralie, I said, my voice soft. I understand, but you need to understand that your actions have consequences. You can't just go around borrowing money from dangerous people and expect everything to be okay. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I know, she said. I've learned my lesson. Tell me about these people, I said, my voice hardening. What do they look like? Where do they hang out? She hesitated for a moment, then began to describe them. She told me about their tattoos, their scars, their menacing demeanor. She told me about the bar where they hung out, the back alleys where they conducted their business. As she spoke, I felt a surge of anger. These people had preyed on her vulnerability, exploited her desperation. They had threatened her safety and her well-being. I vowed to protect her from them. Okay, Coralie, I said, standing up. I'm going to take care of this, but you need to promise me that you're going to follow my instructions. You need to trust me. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with hope. I trust you, Mark, she said. I really do. I nodded. Then let's get to work. Had I made the right choice by deciding to protect her? After meeting with Coralie, I spent the rest of the day gathering information. I contacted an old friend of mine, a retired police detective, and told him about the situation. He gave me some advice, warned me about the dangers involved, and offered to put me in touch with some people who could help. I spent hours online, researching the individuals Coralie had described. I learned about their criminal records, their connections to organized crime, their reputations for violence. The more I learned, the more concerned I became. These were not people to be trifled with. They were ruthless, dangerous, and willing to do anything for money. I knew that I was putting myself at risk by getting involved, but I couldn't turn back now. Coralie's safety was on the line. The next day, I met with my contact, a private investigator named Tony. Tony was a gruff, no-nonsense guy with a weathered face and a steely gaze. He had a reputation for getting results. I told him everything I knew about the situation. I gave him the names and descriptions of the individuals Coralie had borrowed money from, the address of their hangout, and any other information I had gathered. Tony listened intently. His eyes narrowed in concentration. This is a messy situation, Mark, he said when I had finished. These guys are bad news. They're not going to back down easily. I know, I said, but I'm not going to let them hurt Coralie. We need to be careful, Tony said. We need to approach this strategically. We can't just go barging in there guns blazing. I understand, I said. What's the plan? Tony explained his plan. He would use his contacts to gather more information about the individuals and their operation. He would try to find out their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. He would then develop a strategy to pressure them into backing down. It's going to take time, Tony said, and it's going to cost money. I don't care about the cost, I said. I just want Coralie to be safe. Okay, Tony said. Let's get to work. For the next few days, Tony and his team worked tirelessly. They interviewed informants, surveilled the individuals' hangout, and dug up dirt on their past activities. I waited anxiously, my nerves stretched thin. I knew that time was running out. Coralie's debt was due in just a few days. Finally, Tony called me. I have some news, he said, his voice grim. I know where they will be meeting tomorrow night. What kind of meeting? I asked. It's a high-stakes poker game, Tony said. The kind where a lot of money changes hands. And you think I should go? I asked. I think it's our best chance to confront them, Tony said. I'll be there to back you up so you can be safe. But you need to be prepared to face these guys. They're not going to be happy to see you. I took a deep breath. I'm ready, I said. Let's do it. Was I walking into a trap? The bar was dimly lit and smoke-filled. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale beer and desperation. The poker game was being held in a back room, behind a curtain of red velvet. I could hear the clatter of chips and the murmur of voices. Tony and I arrived separately. He positioned himself near the entrance, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. I took a deep breath and pushed aside the curtain. The room was small and crowded. A group of men sat around a table, their faces illuminated by the green glow of the poker chips. I recognized two of them from the descriptions Coralie had given me. They were burly, tattooed, and radiated an aura of menace. I walked over to the table and stood behind one of the men, the one Coralie had identified as the leader of the group. "Excuse me," I said, my voice firm. "I need to speak with you." The man turned around, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" he growled. "My name is Mark," I said. "I'm here about Coralie's debt." The man's eyes widened in surprise. "You're her sugar daddy?" he sneered. "I'm here to make sure she's not harassed anymore," I said, my voice steely. "I'm willing to pay off her debt, but I want your guarantee that you'll leave her alone." The man laughed. "You think you can just waltz in here and buy her way out of this?" he said. "It doesn't work like that. She owes us money, and she's going to pay it, one way or another." "I'm willing to pay you what she owes, plus interest," I said. "But that's it. If you try to contact her again, you'll have me to deal with." The man stood up, towering over me. "You don't want to mess with us," he said, his voice menacing. "We're not afraid to hurt people." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'm here to protect Coralie. If you try to harm her, you'll regret it." The man stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with hatred. Then he smirked. "All right," he said. "We'll take your money. But if she ever crosses us again, you're both going to pay." He extended his hand, and I shook it firmly. I handed him a stack of cash, more than the amount Coralie owed. I wanted to make sure they had no reason to come after her again. As I turned to leave, the man grabbed my arm. "Just so you know," he said, his voice low and menacing, "we always get what we want, one way or another." I didn't reply. I just walked out of the room, leaving him and his cronies behind. Tony met me outside, his face grim. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "But I have a feeling this isn't over." What did he mean by that? We left the bar quickly, melting into the night. The city air felt cleaner, crisper after the smoky haze of the back room. Even so, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The way the guy had grabbed my arm, the glint in his eye, it all suggested this wasn't a clean transaction. "You think they'll keep their word?" I asked Tony as we walked towards my car. Tony chewed on his lip, his gaze scanning the street. "Guys like that, word's about as valuable as Monopoly money. We got her out of immediate danger, but we need to keep our eyes open." That was hardly reassuring. "So what do we do?" "First, Coralie needs to disappear for a while. A few weeks, maybe a month. Somewhere they can't find her. Second, we keep digging. Find out everything we can about their operation. See if we can get something solid to take to the cops." "Disappear where?" I asked. "She has a job, Eleanor." "That's for you to figure out, Mark. But the further she is from this city, the better. And trust me, the cops aren't going to touch this without serious evidence. We're on our own for now." I drove home, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. I'd faced down some dangerous people, paid off a hefty debt, and gotten Coralie out of immediate harm's way. But the feeling of victory was overshadowed by a gnawing sense of dread. When I got back to my place, I saw a light on in the living room. Eleanor was waiting for me, her face etched with worry. "Is she okay?" she asked, the moment I walked in. Did you pay them?" "She's fine for now. And yeah, I paid them. But Tony thinks she needs to disappear for a while just to be safe." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Disappear? Where? She can't just disappear." "That's what I said," I replied, running a hand through my hair. But Tony's right. She needs to be somewhere they can't find her. Do you have any relatives out of state? Friends she could stay with? Eleanor paced the room, her mind clearly racing. My sister lives in Seattle, but I haven't spoken to her in years, and her friends are all here. She won't want to leave them. It's not a request, Eleanor. It's a necessity. Either she goes willingly or I pull the plug on this whole thing. I'm not going to risk my neck for someone who's too stubborn to protect herself. Eleanor stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression a mixture of gratitude and resentment. I don't know what to say, Mark. Thank you for everything, but I can't force her to go. It has to be her decision. The next morning, I met Coralie at a diner near her work. She looked exhausted, her usual bright-eyed enthusiasm replaced by a weary resignation. Your mom told me what happened, she said, her voice flat, about disappearing. It's for your own good, Coralie. These people aren't going to forget about you overnight. You need to be somewhere safe, where they can't find you. But what about my job? My friends? My life? You can get a new job, make new friends. As for your life, consider this a fresh start, a chance to leave all this behind and build something better for yourself. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Where would I go? Your aunt lives in Seattle, right? Maybe you could stay with her for a while. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, she said. I'll do it, but I'm scared. I will help you go. It will be okay. What would Seattle be like? Arranging Coralie's escape to Seattle was a frantic scramble. Plane tickets purchased under a slightly altered version of her name, a hurried goodbye to Eleanor filled with tears and whispered anxieties, and a promise to stay in touch, but only through burner phones and encrypted messaging apps, courtesy of Tony. I drove her to the airport myself, the weight of the situation pressing down on us both. Coralie was a shadow of her former self, her usual bubbly energy replaced by a quiet apprehension. As she clutched her carry-on bag, I couldn't help but see her as the scared little girl she once was, not the entitled teenager I'd grown to resent. You'll be okay, Coralie, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Seattle's a great city. You can reinvent yourself there, just be smart. Don't trust anyone too quickly, and keep that phone turned off unless you absolutely need it. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Mark, she said, her voice choked with emotion. For everything. I don't deserve it. Just make me proud, Coralie, I said, squeezing her hand. Make something of yourself. Show me that this wasn't all for nothing. I watched her walk through security, her small figure disappearing into the crowd. A wave of sadness washed over me, mixed with a strange sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point she needed. Back at my apartment, the silence was deafening. I poured myself a drink and sat on the patio, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The relief of getting Coralie out of harm's way was tempered by a lingering unease. I still didn't trust those guys. I knew they were capable of anything. Tony kept his word, and his team worked tirelessly, digging up dirt on the loan sharks and their operation. They uncovered a web of illegal activities, drug trafficking, extortion, even a few unsolved homicides. The evidence was mounting, but it was still circumstantial. We needed something solid, something that would convince the police to take action. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. I heard from Coralie sporadically, through encrypted messages and quick phone calls on the burner phone. She was working at a coffee shop in Seattle, taking online classes and trying to stay out of trouble. She seemed to be adjusting, slowly but surely. One evening Tony called. His voice was grim. I think we've got something, he said. One of our informants just came through with some solid intel. They're planning a big score next week, a shipment of drugs coming in from out of state. And you think we can use this to take them down? I asked, my heart pounding. It's our best shot, Tony said. But we need to be careful. They're going to be heavily armed and on high alert. I'll be careful, I said, as I promised that. I wasn't sure if I was prepared to risk my life to bring these guys to justice. But I knew that if I didn't act, they would continue to prey on vulnerable people like Coralie. I couldn't let that happen. What's the plan? I asked, as I tried to prepare myself. Tony laid out the details. The shipment was coming in on Tuesday night. to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. He had already alerted his contacts at the local police department. They were willing to provide backup, but they needed concrete evidence to justify a raid. "We need to be there, Mark," Tony said. "We need to witness the transaction, get some photos, something that will leave no room for doubt." "I'm ready to go," I said, as I prepared myself. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong, as if I was walking into another trap. Tuesday night was cold and damp, the kind of night that seeps into your bones and makes you question every decision you've ever made. I met Tony a few blocks from the warehouse, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional wail of a siren. He handed me a bulletproof vest and a small, high-resolution camera. "Stay close, keep your head down, and don't do anything stupid," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is going to be dangerous." We approached the warehouse cautiously, sticking to the shadows. The building was dark and silent, but I could hear faint noises coming from inside. The rumble of a truck engine, the muffled voices of men. Tony signaled me to stop. He pulled out a pair of night vision goggles and peered through a crack in the wall. "They're unloading the shipment," he whispered. "Let's move in." We crept along the side of the building until we reached a loading dock. The doors were slightly ajar, giving us a clear view of the interior. Inside, a group of men were unloading crates from a semi-trailer. I recognized the leader of the loan sharks from our meeting at the bar. He was barking orders, his face contorted with impatience. Tony nudged me, pointing to the crates. They were labeled with innocuous-sounding names, but I knew what they contained. I raised the camera and started snapping photos, capturing the men as they unloaded the crates and stacked them inside the warehouse. Suddenly a voice shouted, "Hey, who's out there?" The men stopped what they were doing and turned towards the loading dock. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. We'd been spotted. Tony grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the shadows. "Run!" he yelled. We sprinted away from the loading dock, the sound of shouting men echoing behind us. We ran as fast as we could, weaving through the maze of buildings and alleys that surrounded the warehouse. I could hear the men gaining on us. They were closing in fast. Suddenly, a shot rang out. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I stumbled and fell to the ground, the camera slipping from my grasp. "Mark!" Tony yelled, rushing back to help me. He knelt beside me, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" "I've been shot," I gasped, clutching my shoulder. "We need to get out of here," Tony said, his voice urgent. "The police are on their way, but we can't wait for them." He helped me to my feet and we continued running, the sound of gunfire echoing behind us. We finally reached Tony's car, a beat-up sedan parked a few blocks from the warehouse. We jumped inside and he sped away, leaving the chaos and gunfire behind. As we drove, I looked back at the warehouse. The police sirens were getting louder and I could see flashing lights in the distance. I knew that the raid was on. The loan sharks were about to face the consequences of their actions. But I also knew that I had been seriously wounded. The bullet had pierced my shoulder and I was losing blood fast. The next few hours were a blur of pain and confusion. I remember the ambulance ride, the bright lights of the emergency room, the flurry of activity as the doctors and nurses worked to stabilize me. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind filled with fragmented images and disjointed thoughts. I saw Coralie's face, young and innocent, then the menacing eyes of the loan shark leader. I heard the sound of gunfire, the wail of sirens, the frantic voices of the medical staff. When I finally regained full consciousness, I was lying in a hospital bed, my shoulder bandaged and throbbing with pain. Tony was sitting in a chair beside me, his face drawn with exhaustion. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low. "Like I've been run over by a truck," I replied, trying to sit up. "Take it easy," Tony said, gently pushing me back down. "You took a bullet. You need to rest." "What happened?" I asked. "Did the police catch them?" Tony nodded. "They caught the whole crew. Thanks to your photos, they had all the evidence they needed. They're going to be facing some serious charges." "And what about the shipment?" I asked. "Confiscated. It was enough drugs to put them away for a long, long time." I sighed with relief. We had done it. We had brought the loan sharks to justice. "What about Coralie?" I asked. "Is she safe?" "She's fine," Tony said. "She's still in Seattle, keeping a low profile. I think it's safe for her to come back now, but I'd still advise her to be careful." I nodded. "Thank you, Tony." I said. For everything. You saved my life. Don't mention it, he said, standing up. Just glad you're okay. I'm going to head out, let you get some rest. I'll check in on you tomorrow. He left the room, and I was alone again. The pain in my shoulder was intense, but I couldn't shake the feeling of satisfaction. I had done something good, something worthwhile. I had protected Coralie and helped to bring down a criminal enterprise. As I lay there trying to relax, I heard a knock at the door. Come in, I said, my voice weak. The door opened, and I was shocked to see Eleanor standing there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red and swollen. Mark, she said, her voice barely a whisper. How are you? I'm okay, I said, surprised to see her. What are you doing here? I heard what happened, she said, her voice trembling. I was so worried. I had to come see you. She walked over to the bed and sat down beside me, taking my hand in hers. I'm so sorry, Mark, she said, tears streaming down her face. This is all my fault. If I hadn't pressured you to help Coralie, none of this would have happened. It's not your fault, Eleanor, I said, squeezing her hand. I made my own choices. I wanted to help her. But you got hurt, she sobbed. You could have died. I'm alive, I said, trying to reassure her. And Coralie's safe. That's all that matters. She looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Mark, she said, for everything. You're a good man. I'm not a saint, Eleanor, I said, my voice weary. I made a lot of mistakes. I just wanted to do the right thing. She smiled sadly. You did, she said. You did the right thing. We sat in silence for a few minutes, holding hands, the tension between us slowly dissipating. Then I heard another knock at the door. Come in, I said, my voice stronger this time. The door opened, and I was even more shocked to see Coralie standing there, her eyes wide with concern. Mark, she said, her voice trembling. I heard what happened. I had to come see you. She walked over to the bed and stood beside Eleanor, her face etched with guilt. I'm so sorry, Mark, she said, tears streaming down her face. This is all my fault. If I hadn't been so stupid, you wouldn't have gotten hurt. It's not your fault, Coralie, I said, my voice gentle. I wanted to help you. I wanted to protect you. But you risked your life for me, she sobbed. I don't deserve it. You deserve a second chance, Coralie, I said. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to live a good life. She looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Mark, she said, for everything. I'll never forget what you've done for me. I smiled weakly. Just promise me you'll make the most of it, I said. Promise me you'll learn from your mistakes and build a better future for yourself. I promise, she said, her voice firm. I won't let you down. Eleanor and Coralie looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They had both come to see me, to express their gratitude and their remorse. They had both realized the depth of my kindness and the extent of their own selfishness. As I lay there in the hospital bed, surrounded by the two women who had once caused me so much pain, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had been hurt, betrayed, and taken advantage of. But I had also risen to the occasion, shown compassion, and risked my life to protect someone in need. I had emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The echoes of the past had finally faded, replaced by a sense of hope for the future. The recovery was long and arduous. Physical therapy, sleepless nights, and a constant reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. But with each passing day, I grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. Eleanor visited me often during my recovery, bringing flowers, books, and her quiet, calming presence. We talked, we reminisced, and we slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by the events of the past few months. Coralie stayed in Seattle, working hard at her coffee shop job and taking online classes. She called me regularly, her voice filled with optimism and determination. She was turning her life around, one day at a time. A few months after the shooting, I finally returned to the Gilded Grape. The staff welcomed me back with open arms, their faces beaming with joy. The bar felt like home, a place where I belonged, a place where I could be myself. I threw myself back into the business, experimenting with new wines, hosting special events, and reconnecting with my loyal customers. The Gilded Grape thrived, a testament to my hard work, my passion, and my unwavering commitment to quality. One evening, as I was pouring a glass of wine for a regular customer, I saw Coralie walk through the door. She looked different, older, more mature. She was wearing a simple dress and a pair of flats, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She had lost the entitled, superficial demeanor that had once defined her. She walked over to the bar and sat down, her eyes shining with happiness. "Hi, Mark," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "Coralie," I replied, smiling. "It's good to see you. What brings you back to town?" "I finished my online classes," she said, "and I got accepted to a community college here. I want to be closer to my mom, and to thank you properly." "That's wonderful, Coralie," I said, feeling a surge of pride. "I'm so happy for you." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mark," she said, her voice sincere. "You gave me a second chance. You believed in me when no one else did." I poured her a glass of wine. "You earned that second chance, Coralie," I said. "You worked hard, you stayed focused, and you never gave up." She smiled and took a sip of the wine. "It's delicious," she said. "You're still the best bartender in town." "And you're still the best stepdaughter a guy could ask for," I said, winking. She laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh that warmed my soul. As we sat there, talking and catching up, I realized that the journey I had been on had led me to this moment. A moment of peace, of forgiveness, of redemption. I had faced my demons, confronted my fears, and emerged from the darkness stronger than ever before. I had learned the true meaning of family, the power of forgiveness, and the importance of second chances. And as I looked at Coralie, sitting there beside me, I knew that the future was bright. She had turned her life around. She was working towards a better future, and she was finally becoming the person I always knew she could be. The Gilded Grape was more than just a wine bar. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that even the darkest of nights can give way to a new dawn.